Let's imagine you're a pigeon coasting above a city, or a shorebird skimming the coastline. The air is smooth, the wind is cool in your feathers, and the world below is just a blur of traffic noise, waves, and food. You might think this is peak bird life, easy mode. Nothing to worry about except not flying into a window. But what you actually find is that the real danger doesn't come from in front of you. It comes from a place you are almost never allowed to look. At first it's nothing, just daylight on your back. Then, so slowly you almost miss it, the light above you dims. A tiny shadow stretches over your wings, like a cold stain sliding across your body. The pressure in the air changes. You feel it before you understand it, a tightness against your feathers, a strange heaviness in your chest. The distant roar of traffic, or surf, or city wind suddenly feels muffled. In its place, there's this new sound, a thin, rising rush, like someone tearing the sky in half. It's not loud yet. That's the worst part. It's quiet, and getting very quickly not quiet. You don't look up. You're not built to look up. Your eyes are set for scanning the ground, the horizon, the friends next to you. Up is where sunlight comes from, not problems. And every bird you've ever followed, every emergency turn you've ever copied, has taught you the same rule. If you see the shape, it's already too late. So your body decides before your brain does. Your wings slam sideways. Your muscles explode into a blind, full-body swerve. You veer hard, dragging the air with you, yanking the flock into a panicked chain reaction. You don't even know what you're running from. You just know that every nerve you have is suddenly screaming move. Freeze that moment. Mid-flap. Eyes wide. Heart punching your ribs. The shadow above you sharpens into something with edges. Because up there, dropping out of a patch of innocent blue like a thrown brick from heaven, is a 2-pound falcon folded into a perfect teardrop. This is the world of the peregrine stoop. A feathered bullet falling from the clouds at over 240 miles per hour, faster than any jet you will ever see this close. Its wings are tucked so tight they're almost gone. Its body is a living dart, and its eyes are locked onto the exact spot where your skull is about to be. See, from your point of view, this is just sudden, senseless terror. But from its point of view, this is guided physics. The air around its face is screaming, shock waves slamming into its head, and it's still calmly adjusting a feather here, a claw there, to correct its aim by a few inches. And to almost every bird on Earth, that silhouette isn't just a predator. It's a sky-wide terror signal, a shape that has rewired your daily flight paths, your migration routes, even the way your species evolved its eyes and wings. So how did one relatively small falcon manage to scare the entire sky into redesigning itself? Every bird that survives long enough to migrate, flirt, and yell at neighbors learns one rule first. Not about food, not about weather, about shadows. If a dark, pointed shape appears above you, you don't investigate. You don't try to be brave. You just vanish. Let's imagine you're a sandpiper on an Arctic mudflat. A second ago, you were busy doing sandpiper things, legs flicking, beak in the mud, brain running on snack, and don't freeze. The sky is calm. The flock is scattered. Everything feels boring in that safe, background noise way. Then, way up, the tiniest dart-shaped silhouette clips the edge of your vision. You don't check what species. You don't zoom in. Your entire body just explodes into flight. See, this isn't a thoughtful decision. It's a full-system panic button that's been wired into you by both evolution and culture. You might think prey birds are just born with a generic raptor, except you're bad instinct. But what you actually find is way more specific and way more eerie. Chicks that grow up watching their parents react to peregrine shapes learn to copy that exact freakout, down to how fast they launch and what direction they turn. On those Arctic mudflats, you can watch the rule spread in real time. One bird sees the falcon's outline and snaps into the air. The neighbor copies. Then the neighbor's neighbor. In less than a second, a lazy, scattered feeding party has snapped into a tight, twisting swarm, hundreds of bodies moving like a single, glitchy cloud. From the ground, it looks beautiful. From the falcon's point of view, it's suddenly a school of fish trying not to be the one that becomes physics. And yes, these guys are all real. Flocks of knots, dunlin, and godwits that have literally reshaped their entire migration schedules to avoid peak falcon hours. Parents drag chicks into the air during drills when a shadow passes. Flocks in one bay copy the escape patterns of flocks in the next bay over. It's a horror story, but it's also a lesson plan. Now compare that to how you see a peregrine. Cool. Majestic. The conservation comeback story with the GoPro footage and the slow-motion dives. To humans, this is a feathered fighter jet that got a second chance after the whole DDT disaster. We put them on stamps and skyscrapers. To other birds, that same silhouette is basically a flying guillotine. A sudden, cold, 240-mile-an-hour math problem. Get the angle wrong, and you're hit with the force of a thrown brick mid-air. No dramatic music, just a puff of feathers, and then nothing. This is the world of sky culture, where fear travels faster than genes. So how did one medium-sized falcon get so terrifyingly efficient that its shadow alone can snap an entire ecosystem into formation? To answer that, you have to follow it into the dive and watch what happens when gravity, air, and a bird decide to build a weapon together. So, when that falcon tips over the edge of the sky, it's not just falling. You're watching the fastest animal on planet Earth clock in for work. Not the cheetah, not some exotic fish, not even a fighter jet with a pilot. A medium-sized bird that, in a dive, has been clocked at over 240 miles per hour. You might think that has to be an exaggeration, right? Bird people getting a little too excited with the speed gun? But what you actually find is that those numbers are painfully real. Researchers and falconers strap GPS loggers and tiny high-speed sensors onto trained peregrines, then film them with slow-motion cameras from the ground and from planes. The data lines up, again and again. 240 plus. Repeated. Verified. The sky's official speeding ticket champion. Let's imagine you're the target. You're a pigeon, doing absolutely nothing wrong, just flapping along. Somewhere way above you, a dark speck tilts, folds its wings, and disappears into gravity. That's the peregrine starting its stoop dive. The wings don't stay wide and flappy. They snap back into a tight teardrop. The bird's body angles like a thrown dart, and the tail shrinks down into this tiny, twitching rudder. From a distance, it doesn't even look like a bird anymore. It looks like ammunition. At that speed, air stops feeling like air. It feels cold and hard, like a giant invisible wall you're ramming through. The falcon's feathers lock down, its head tucks, and its nostrils, which look like little cones, actually act like built-in jet engine diffusers, so the air doesn't blast straight into its lungs and knock it out. Its vision stays locked, 2 to 3 times sharper than yours, tracking a panicking blur that has no idea what's about to happen. Now for the part your brain really doesn't like. At 240 miles per hour, in the time it takes you to blink, the falcon has already traveled more than 100 feet toward its target. One eyelid flick. 100 feet erased. If you look up and see it, you are, functionally, already out of time. This is not a chase. This is a scheduled impact, And that impact? Imagine being punched by a heavyweight boxer who fell from a skyscraper first. The falcon doesn't even need claws to do the damage. A closed foot or the edge of its body hitting a wing or skull at those speeds can kill on contact. And yes, these guys are all real. This is the world of guided kinetic weapons that just happen to grow feathers and lay eggs. So when you hear fast bird, that sounds kind of cute. But what's actually hanging over every lake, cliff, and city skyline is a living smart bomb that turned the open sky into a place where standing still can get you killed. The only question now is, how does anything up there survive long enough to learn that fear? Every bird up there knows the rule now. If the sky suddenly grows a dark, bullet-shaped shadow above you, you don't admire it. You don't even really look at it. You just detonate into pure panic and hope your wings remember how to exist. You might think that's just what happens when something is really, really fast. If a peregrine can hit over 240 miles per hour in a dive, of course everything freaks out, right? But what you actually find is that speed by itself doesn't scare anybody. Swifts are insanely fast. Ducks can rip across the sky like feathered fighter jets. Human fighter jets literally break the sound barrier right over migration routes. Most birds glance up, adjust a little, and keep doing bird stuff. So why does a peregrine silhouette make the whole sky snap from chilling to apocalypse in half a second? See, lots of raptors are dangerous. Goshawks, eagles, harriers, owls. To a pigeon, that's a whole Avengers lineup of things that want to eat you. But only a tiny handful, like peregrines, trigger this instant, species-wide, no questions asked bolt response. Birds that have never even been hit by one still react like they've seen this movie before. Let's imagine you're a shorebird in a flock of 1,000, flying over the ocean. A hawk comes in from the side? The flock ripples, dodges, maybe loses a few unlucky birds. A peregrine comes in from a mile above, out of the sun, at the exact moment your flock is committed to a turn? That's different. It doesn't just arrive fast. It arrives from a blind angle, on the perfect line, at the perfect second, with this surgical guided missile accuracy that makes dodging feel optional. At those speeds, the air itself stops behaving nicely. Ram into it at 240 miles per hour, and it's basically a cold, invisible wall. Your eyes should dry out instantly. Your lungs should overpressurize. Your neck should snap when you try to adjust your aim. But peregrines are built like someone read a physics textbook and then went off the rails. They've got bony little cones in their nostrils that work like jet engine diffusers, slowing and redirecting the airflow so they can breathe while falling out of the sky like a dropped brick. Their vision is 2 to 3 times sharper than yours, with a deep fovea that lets them lock onto a tiny bird from over a kilometer away while the world blurs into streaks. And yes, these guys are all real. This is the world of animals that should be tumbling, blacking out, and dying, but instead are calmly adjusting tail feathers by millimeters to shift their trajectory by meters. So if speed isn't the whole story, what is? To really get why the sky is terrified, you have to stop thinking of peregrines as birds of prey and start thinking of them as engineered projectiles that just happen to grow feathers. Next, we're going inside that design, down the stoop, to see how a living smart bomb actually flies without tearing itself apart. So, we should probably give this nightmare a name. Falconers have one, and scientists just quietly stole it. They call that plunge a stoop. Not a dive, not a fall. A stoop. Like the bird is folding itself into a single idea. Down. Let's imagine you're a pigeon on a city rooftop. It's a nice, calm, boring day, You might think the real danger is the cat in the alley or the bus below, but what you actually find is way higher up. A peregrine is either circling on cold thermals above a cliff or just sitting on the edge of a skyscraper like it owns the lease, scanning hundreds of meters of airspace for something exactly like you. Then, with almost no warning, it tips. The wings pull in, the body rolls over, and the bird stops being bird-shaped and becomes a teardrop. That moment is the start of the stoop, a controlled fall that very quickly stops feeling like falling at all. See, gravity is doing the basic job, yanking this 2-pound falcon toward the ground, but the design is what turns it into a weapon. The peregrine's body is insanely streamlined. Wings pulled tight, feet tucked, head slightly down. It's basically a feathered bullet. Air that would slam into a normal bird flows around it, and drag drops so low that acceleration just keeps building. That's how you get to 200, 240 miles per hour before your brain can even finish the sentence, uh-oh. But it's not just a rock with opinions. Tiny movements of the tail and those razor-thin wings steer the stoop like fins on a missile. A millimeter of feather shift can move the impact point by meters. And yes, these guys are all real birds, not CGI jets, even though they're flying through shock waves of compressed air that would make a paper airplane disintegrate instantly. Here's the part your nervous system will not enjoy. At those speeds, the forces on the body are huge. A sharp pull-up at the end of a stoop can load the peregrine with G-forces that would knock a human pilot unconscious. You blink, you black out. The falcon? It just threads between buildings, adjusts its angle by a few degrees, and punches a duck out of the sky like a thrown brick. So how is this even allowed? How does a bird that weighs about as much as a liter of milk stay conscious, keep its eyes locked on a target the size of a fist, and not have its lungs shredded by the oncoming air? What hidden anatomical hacks are buried under those feathers that let it not just survive that speed, but weaponize it so completely that other birds treat its silhouette like a universal game over symbol in the sky? This is the world of the stoop, a named, repeatable physics experiment that every peregrine runs with its own body. Next, we're going under the hood to see how evolution quietly turned their bones, lungs, and even eyeballs into crash-proof guidance systems. So, let's imagine you're not just watching a peregrine dive from the ground. You're strapped to its back, pointed straight at the earth. The moment it drops into a full stoop, the air doesn't feel like wind anymore. It feels like a solid thing trying to peel your face off. At 240 miles per hour, the air slams into the bird's head with enormous pressure. You might think it's just loud, but what you actually find is a full-body assault. The sound becomes a deep roar in the feathers. Tiny pockets of swirling air, little vortices, grab at the wingtips and tail, trying to twist them, trying to rip them open like someone shaking an umbrella in a hurricane. Any mistake here isn't just uncomfortable, it's structural failure. And because the peregrine is moving so fast, the air starts acting less like a gentle gas and more like a fluid wall. As the bird punches into it, the flow piles up around the head and chest. Pressure spikes. Localized shock waves form tiny invisible shells where the air suddenly jumps from slow to fast, from high pressure to low, wrapping the falcon's body in a shifting cocoon of compressed atmosphere. You're basically looking at a feathered bullet carving a pressure tunnel through the sky. So how does that not just flip it end over end? This is where the designed by a bored aerospace engineer vibe really kicks in. The peregrine folds into a near-perfect teardrop. Head tucked, feet pulled in, wings swept back into a tight sickle shape. That teardrop keeps the airflow attached, hugging the body instead of breaking away into chaotic turbulence. Drag drops, buffeting drops. The bird becomes a guided dart instead of a tumbling brick. See, those swept-back wings aren't just for looking cool on medieval tapestries. They act like the delta wing of a jet, smoothing out the violent vortices that build at the leading edge. The falcon can subtly change the angle of those wings to ride right on the edge between maximum speed and total loss of control. It's flying inside a razor-thin stability window, and somehow it's comfortable there. And then you zoom in even closer. High-speed footage shows that the wings and tail are never truly locked. Tiny feathers along the edges keep flicking, lifting, settling. Each one acts like a micro-aileron on a fighter jet, trimming the airflow, damping out little wobbles, nudging the dive a hair left, a hair right, so that a pigeon half a mile away stays exactly in the crosshairs. But even if you solve all that aerodynamics, you've still got a huge, stupid problem. At 240 miles per hour, how does this bird keep breathing and seeing when the air itself is trying to ram its lungs shut and sandblast its eyes? That's where the really weird upgrades start to show up. So, let's imagine you freeze that falcon mid-dive and zoom way in on its face. You might think you'd see just a normal bird beak, some cute little nostrils, maybe a bit of wind-swept drama. But what you actually find is something that looks like a tiny piece of jet engine hardware jammed into its nose. Right there, in each nostril, is a small, round opening with a weird bony cone sticking up in the middle. A peg. A spike. It looks decorative, like evolution tried nose piercings and never took them out. And yes, these guys are all real. But that little cone is the only reason this bird can scream through cold air at 240 miles per hour without its lungs exploding like a badly designed air mattress. Here's the problem. At those speeds, air stops feeling like nothing and starts feeling like a fire hose. If that airflow blasted straight into an open nostril, it would ram down the windpipe, overpressurize the lungs, and basically suffocate the bird mid-attack. You'd get the fastest animal on Earth. That passes out right before impact. Not a great business model for a sky assassin. So, what does the tubercle do? See, that cone breaks up the incoming air, forcing it to swirl and slow down before it reaches the delicate passages deeper in the head. It's acting like a diffuser in a jet engine, taking a brutal, high-speed blast and turning it into something the bird can actually breathe. The falcon is falling at race car speeds, but inside its chest, the airflow feels more like a steady, controlled breeze. This isn't just a bird hack, either. Early jet fighters had the exact same problem. At high speed, air rushed into the engine so fast it caused stalls and pressure spikes. Engineers had to add little cones and splitter plates in the intakes to calm the airflow. You might think humans invented this clever trick first, but the peregrine's nose has been running that design for millions of years. This is the world of convergent engineering. Metal jets and feathered missiles solving the same physics with the same shape. And the face upgrades don't stop at the nostrils. The skull is thick and strong. The neck muscles are reinforced like suspension cables, and the facial skin is pulled tight so it doesn't flap and tear under that huge wind load. Even the brow ridge helps shield the eyes, turning the whole front of the head into a streamlined crash helmet. By this point, you're not looking at a fast bird anymore. You're looking at an animal that comes preloaded with hardware to survive a dive that would choke, blind, or literally rip apart most other creatures midair. And once it can breathe and see at those speeds, the next question gets even scarier. What happens when all that controlled fury actually hits something? So now you've got this feathered crash helmet slicing through the air like a dropped anvil. But a question pops up. How do you even aim when the world is whipping past at over 200 miles an hour? Most animals would just be experiencing one long, blurry panic. The peregrine treats it like slow motion. Let's imagine you borrow its eyes for a second. Human vision is already pretty good, but a peregrine's is roughly 2 to 3 times sharper. Your phone screen at arm's length? To them, that's like a billboard. Their retinas aren't just flat camera sensors either. They've got these deep pits called foveae, and one of them is so exaggerated it basically acts like a built-in telephoto lens glued into the eyeball. You might think that means they just zoom in on everything and call it a day, but what you actually find is way smarter. That deep fovea creates a visual sweet spot off to the side where moving objects pop into insane detail. A small bird over a kilometer away, just a little speck in the sky for you, shows up for them like a highlighted target icon. Once they've tagged you, the whole dive is about keeping you pinned in that tiny patch of perfect vision. Now add the part that should not be possible. During a stoop, the peregrine isn't just falling, it's rolling, twisting, adjusting its wings in micro moves to ride shock waves and pockets of pressure. The horizon is cartwheeling. The wind is screaming. And yet, that tiny bird stays locked in the same place on its retina, like a sniper scope glued to your forehead. This is the world of high-speed tracking, where losing sight for even a blink means losing lunch. Of course, staring into a 200-meter-hour sandblaster would normally shred your eyes. So, evolution quietly added a cheat code, the nictitating membrane. It's a clear third eyelid that slides over the eye like a biological visor. Every time the falcon blinks in a dive, that membrane sweeps across, scrubbing dust and debris, cutting the wind, but still letting enough light through that the target never disappears. Behind those eyes, the brain is running its own prediction engine. It's tuned for motion detection and rapid processing, constantly asking, where will that bird be a fraction of a second from now? Because at those speeds, aiming at where the prey is right now means you'll hit where it used to be. So the peregrine aims for the future position, turning the whole attack into a guided missile that's always slightly ahead of you. And yes, these guys are all real. From the prey's point of view, the dive isn't just fast, it feels rigged. Once that dark shape high above locks you into its visual sweet spot, the odds of escape don't just go down, they crater. So the only real question left is, when that living bullet finally arrives, what does the impact actually do? So, when that living bullet arrives, it doesn't float in like a gentle grab. It punches. You might think the falcon just reaches out and politely snatches a pigeon midair, but what you actually find is closer to a thrown brick from the sky. Let's imagine you're that pigeon. 1 second, you're flapping along, doing your very important bread-eating schedule. The next, something hits you from above with a closed foot, talons clenched, like a feathery hammer. Peregrines don't always open the claws first. They often strike with a balled-up foot, turning their leg into a short, rigid club that concentrates all that speed into one brutal point of contact. See, even when they're not at that record-breaking 240-mile-an-hour stoop, the numbers are still ugly. A peregrine weighs around 2 pounds, but it can easily be moving at highway speeds when it connects. Picture a heavyweight boxer throwing a full-power punch. Now compress that energy into a target that weighs a few ounces and has hollow bones. The energy per square inch on that tiny spine or skull is suddenly huge. And yes, these guys are all real. This is the world of mid-air trauma, where the goal isn't a long fight, it's instant shutdown. Many victims never even make it to the being carried stage. Spines snap, skulls crack, organs slam against rib cages hard enough to tear and bleed. A lot of prey birds simply switch off in the moment of impact, dead or dying before the falcon even bothers to uncurl those famous talons. You might think that kind of hit would be just as dangerous for the falcon, and honestly, if it didn't manage the physics, it would be. Slamming into something at full terminal speed is a good way to become your own crater. So peregrines cheat the math a bit. Right before impact, they often pull up, flaring their wings and tail, bleeding off some vertical speed and converting the dive into a more horizontal strike. The hit is still catastrophic for the prey, but the falcon spreads the deceleration over a slightly longer path, saving its own bones while breaking someone else's. From the ground, it still just looks like a blur and a puff of feathers. From the prey's point of view, it's worse. There's no drawn-out chase, no wrestling match, no cinematic duel in the clouds. Just calm sky, maybe a distant speck you're trying very hard to ignore. And then an invisible hammer from nowhere. That randomness is part of why the fear sticks. How do you escape something you only notice at the exact moment it kills you? But even that isn't the whole horror story, because the sky isn't just filled with individual birds learning this the hard way. It's filled with cultures of prey passing down the shape of that terror. So, if every bird brain is carrying this shared ghost story, you might think it just says, "Beware raptors," and calls it a day. Big wings, sharp beak, scary eyes, done. But what you actually find is way more specific. The terror is dialed in to one particular style of attack. Let's imagine you're a pigeon, sitting in a city park. A red-tailed hawk shows up. Bad news, sure, but the script is familiar. Hawks and a lot of eagles hunt with endurance chases or ambush from a perch. They launch from a tree or lamppost, come in at roughly your level, and you usually get a second or two of "oh no" before impact. That's enough time for the flock to explode into the air, jink, scream, do something. See, most raptors are playing a horizontal game. They come from the side, or they punch up from below the canopy. Prey species have had tens of millions of years to build their entire nervous systems around that. Eyes on the sides of the head, constant side-to-side scanning, flock formations that watch every direction on the same plane. It's like living on a flat battlefield where the bullets mostly skim the surface. And yes, these guys are all real threats. A goshawk blasting through the trees at you is no joke. But even then, it's usually coming in at eye level, where your visual coverage is strongest and your reflexes are primed. You see a shape, you see wing beats, your brain screams "raptor" and hits the eject button. Peregrines do not play that game. They specialize in the angle your brain is worst at. Top down, high speed, from above, and just behind, right through the blind spot where most birds' vision overlaps the least. It's like evolution looked at every prey animal's coverage map and said, "Cool, I'll take the gap." You might think other falcons would trigger the same full-body panic. Merlins, hobbies, those guys are fast too. But most of them are sprint racers, not gravity-assisted missiles. They'll chase along hedgerows, skim over fields, weave through trees at high speed. Scary. Absolutely. But still mostly horizontal, still giving your warning systems something to lock onto. A peregrine in a proper stoop is something else. We're talking 200, 240 miles per hour, body folded into a teardrop, air roaring past so hard its skull and feathers are literally engineered to handle shockwaves. That vertical dive compresses the entire attack into a fraction of a second. No drawn-out chase, no cinematic duel, just a brick from orbit. Pattern interrupt? Here's one. From the prey's perspective, the peregrine isn't even a bird anymore. It's an event, a non-negotiable physics problem. This is the world of sky psychology, where angle plus speed plus precision gets its own category in the fear library. Other raptors are dangerous, but they're negotiable threats. You can spot them, outmaneuver them, sometimes even mob them. Peregrines are different. When that dark bullet appears overhead, every instinct says the same thing. Don't argue. Don't look. Just run. So if every instinct is yelling, "Don't look, just run," you have to ask, what are those instincts actually working with? How does a pigeon, or a duck, or a sandpiper even see a sky that's trying to kill it from above? Let's imagine you're a pigeon for a second. Your eyes are on the sides of your head, not the front. You get this huge panoramic view, almost a full circle of horizon. You can watch the ground, your buddies, and that guy with the bread all at the same time. For catching seeds and spotting a hawk cruising at eye level, it's great. You're basically a flying security camera. But what you actually find, if you map that vision out, is a giant blind compromise. Side-mounted eyes mean your forward depth perception is narrow, and the price of that wraparound view is a weak spot, a cone of reduced sensitivity directly above and behind you. The exact place a small, dark falcon likes to appear. When a peregrine is a tiny speck a kilometer up, it can sit right inside that soft spot in your awareness, getting bigger and bigger, while your brain is still mostly thinking about lunch. You might think flocking would fix this. Just add more eyes, right? And to be fair, flocking does help. A tight ball of starlings or shorebirds is basically a floating radar array. Different birds are angled slightly differently, scanning different slices of sky, passing panic through the group in milliseconds. This is the world of aerial crowdsourcing. But then the peregrine hits the fast-forward button. When a falcon drops out of that overhead cone at 200+ miles an hour, only a handful of birds are actually looking in the right place at the right microsecond. By the time the alarm ripples through the flock, one unlucky bird has already been turned into physics homework. The rest explode in every direction, not because they clearly saw the attacker, but because they clearly saw something vanish. Researchers have played dirty with this. They fly cardboard cutouts and drone silhouettes over flocks, testing who freaks out and when. And yes, these guys are all real experiments. Show birds a generic blob overhead, and you get some polite concern. Show them a falcon-shaped shadow with those pointed wings and narrow tail, and suddenly everyone is auditioning for fastest panic response. Their brains are wired to pick out that specific murder outline against a bright sky. Well, that wiring didn't appear overnight. Over generations, the constant threat from above has quietly edited bird species like a very mean film director. Daily schedules shift to avoid the falcon rush hour. Migration routes bend around cliff lines and traditional peregrine hangouts. Bodies get tighter, wings get pointier, tails get longer, all to jink just a little sharper in that final half-second. You're not just looking at individual birds trying to dodge a dive. You're looking at entire species that have been sculpted by a predator they mostly never see coming. And once you understand how limited that sky view really is, you can finally ask the scary follow-up. What does the world look like through the eyes of the thing that hunts inside those blind spots? So, let's imagine you're not the falcon. You're one of the things that gets hunted. You don't get a slow, thoughtful evolution lecture. You get milliseconds and whatever your flock has already taught you. You might think fear of peregrines is just hardwired, like a factory setting baked into every bird brain. But what you actually find is way messier and way smarter. A lot of that terror is learned, socially, the same way you pick up slang or fashion trends. Young birds watch the adults, and very quickly they learn this one brutal rule. That particular dark, tapered shape up there, that's the drop everything and run icon. See, most of the time, nobody has actually seen the falcon hit. The peregrine is a rumor in the sky. One pigeon, way out on the edge of the flock, spots a speck that's just a little too pointy, a little too high, moving just a little too fast. It gives a specific alarm call and snaps into a dive. That one move is contagious. In a fraction of a second, hundreds of birds copy it, then thousands, like a stadium wave powered by pure panic. From the ground, it looks random, like the flock just exploded for no reason. From inside the cloud, it feels like someone yelled, "Fire," and nobody even waits to see the smoke. And yes, these guys are all real birds with real decisions, but once that alarm goes off, they behave like a single organism that has decided the sky is suddenly made of knives. This is the world of socially transmitted fear. Those alarm calls and evasive drills don't stay in one park or one bay. They travel. Migrating shorebirds move in massive chains that stretch across continents. A flock gets attacked by a peregrine on one stopover, and for the next few weeks, every time a similar silhouette appears overhead, they're jumpier, flying lower, clumping tighter. Young birds in that group log that response as correct, then carry it thousands of kilometers to the next site. Well, now you've turned one bad day into culture. Studies with racing pigeons show that after a single close encounter with a peregrine, their routes bend away from the ambush point, and their vigilance stays cranked up for weeks. Wild flocks do the same thing. They start launching earlier, flying more erratically, burning extra energy because one feathered missile once fell out of the cold blue. So what do you get when a predator doesn't just remove bodies, but rewires behavior every time it shows up? You get an ecosystem where migration paths, feeding times, even who nests where, are all being edited by a shadow that most individuals never actually see up close. And if fear itself can spread like gossip on the wind, what happens when the falcon starts changing the sky in new places it was never supposed to rule? So, when that fear starts leaking into new skies, where does it spread first? Not some wild cliff or remote coast. It spreads right over you, in the middle of a city sidewalk, with coffee in one hand and your phone in the other. Look up at a modern skyline for a second. Glass towers, sharp ledges, endless rooftop corners. You might think it's just architecture trying to look important, but what you actually find is something way older hiding in plain sight. This is a man-made mountain range. To a peregrine, those mirrored high-rises are just steel cliffs with extra perches and better views. Let's imagine you're not you for a moment. You're a pigeon. Your whole world is street food, window ledges, and dodging bikes. The sky is a maze of concrete walls with a thin strip of light above. Feels safe, right? Any predator would have to work really hard to find you down here. Except a peregrine is sitting 50 stories up, right on the corner of a skyscraper, exactly where its ancestors would have nested on some sheer sea cliff. Same height, same drop. Just with Wi-Fi and an elevator. From up there, it can watch whole flocks of pigeons and starlings pulsing through the street canyons, like little packets of food running on a schedule. Then one of you makes a mistake. You flare your wings a bit too wide, crossing an intersection. A dark shape detaches from the building above. You don't hear a scream. You hear the wind itself change. A low roar between the towers as the falcon drops, folding into a living bullet, using those vertical walls to guide its dive the way a fighter jet uses a trench run. Echoes slam around you. Your own wing beats bounce back off glass. shadows flicker on reflective windows as the peregrine threads between balconies and traffic lights, riding gusts thrown off by warm building faces. You bank hard, skimming over a bus, thinking you've broken line of sight, and then its reflection appears beside you in the windows, a black arrow racing your own ghost. See, cities didn't just allow peregrines back after the DDT crash. They accidentally upgraded them. Artificial lighting keeps prey birds active longer. Restaurant dumpsters and park lawns keep pigeon populations huge. Updrafts and heat rising off the concrete give falcons extra lift so they can climb fast and drop faster, turning every avenue into a ready-made attack corridor. And yes, these guys are all real, sitting on office towers like they're collecting rent. To a starling flock, this isn't some neutral urban landscape. This is the world of vertical killing fields, where danger can fall from any rooftop at 200 miles an hour. The twist? On natural cliffs, prey at least knew where the bad neighborhood ended. In a city, the cliff is everywhere. Our concrete jungles didn't just welcome peregrines back, they may have made them scarier than they've ever been. So what does a falcon have to become, physically, to rule both mountains and skyscrapers like that? So, if peregrines are built to own both cliffs and skyscrapers, why did the sky ever get a break from them in the first place? To answer that, you actually have to rewind to one of the most boring-looking villains in this whole story, a white powder called DDT. Let's imagine it's the 1950s. You're not a falcon, you're just a farmer, spraying this miracle pesticide on crops, in barns, along rivers. You might think it just kills bugs and then politely disappears, but what you actually find is that it doesn't go away at all. It climbs the food chain. Insects pick it up. Small birds eat the insects. Peregrines eat the birds. And yes, these guys are all real casualties of that chain. Inside the falcons, DDT didn't make them drop dead on the spot. It did something weirder. It messed with calcium metabolism, so when a female peregrine laid her eggs, the shells came out too thin. We're talking so thin that when she settled down to incubate, doing exactly what evolution told her to do, her own weight crushed the embryo. Imagine an apex predator that can punch like a falling brick, defeated by breakfast-level physics. Across huge parts of Europe and North America, cliff ledges that had held peregrine nests for centuries suddenly went silent. No chicks, no hunting parents, no dark bullet shapes patrolling the coastlines and city skylines. In some regions, they vanished completely. For the first time in living memory, pigeons, shorebirds, and ducks could migrate or loaf around over rivers without that constant question in the back of their tiny bird brains. Is something about to drop on me at 200 miles an hour? But humans actually noticed. Biologists started climbing those empty cliffs, counting broken eggs, measuring shell thickness, and realizing this wasn't just bad luck. It was chemistry. The response was one of the biggest plot twists in conservation history. Countries banned DDT. Captive breeding programs popped up, where people hand-raised peregrine chicks like tiny screaming fighter jets in cardboard boxes. Here's where it gets really weird. To put them back, conservationists didn't just hike into remote canyons. They looked up at cities and thought, wait, that's basically a giant fake cliff. So they started placing nest boxes on skyscrapers, cathedral towers, smokestacks, and bridges. You might think the birds would treat those like cheap knockoffs and head straight back to wild crags, but what you actually find is that many of them loved it. See, urban life came with perks. Cities had way more prey, especially feral pigeons, and far fewer competing raptors. No golden eagles, no giant owls, just endless flying snacks and updrafts curling around glass and steel. This is the world of the urban peregrine. Same murder dive, new address. For a few decades, prey birds got a reprieve. The shadow over the water lifted. The air felt safer. But that holiday is over. The old fear is back, only now it hunts between mirrored windows and LED billboards, turning our skylines into vertical kill zones. So, what does it actually take, physically, to survive that kind of speed and walk away from your own impact? So, what does it actually take physically to survive that kind of speed and walk away from your own impact? If you're a pigeon, the answer is everything you've got, all at once, every time a shadow twitches above you. You might think city pigeons are just background NPCs, little gray potatoes pecking at fries, waddling around your feet, barely bothering to move when a bus roars past. But what you actually find, the instant a peregrine slides into the sky above them, is a hard cut into a different movie. The whole flock detonates. Birds that looked half asleep suddenly snap into fighter jet mode. Let's imagine you're standing in a plaza, scrolling your phone, surrounded by 50 pigeons doing their usual chaos. Then, way up there, a dark bullet shape appears. You don't even notice it. They do. In a fraction of a second, the flock explodes upward like someone hit a panic button. Some rocket straight up in a vertical climb, others knife sideways around building corners so tight they almost scrape the brick. A few peel off into these wild barrel rolls that look like they're glitching midair. It feels random, but it's not. Those twists and flips are evasive maneuvers tuned to one specific nightmare: a peregrine dropping at over 200 miles an hour. If you keep flying straight, you're a clay pigeon at a shooting range. So pigeons spam unpredictability. Sudden climbs force the falcon to overshoot. Barrel rolls make its tracking solution break for a split second. Hard 90-degree turns around a corner use the building as a physical shield because even a feathered missile can't pass through concrete. And yes, these guys are all real athletes. Feral city pigeons aren't just wild rock doves anymore. They're the escapees and descendants of racing and homing lines that humans bred to be fast, tireless, and weirdly obsessed with getting home. We accidentally built tiny endurance machines, then released them into a sky patrolled by the fastest animal on Earth. That speed and stamina you'd want for a 1,000-kilometer race? It's now what lets a pigeon do 3 emergency sprints in a row and still have gas left when the falcon comes back around. Pigeon fanciers have been watching this arms race in real time. They'll tell you about a loft sitting calm, birds preening. Then a speck appears on the horizon. Not a close falcon, just a silhouette. Instantly, the entire flock blows apart, scattering in every direction, some vanishing so far and so fast that they're found miles away hours later, or never come back at all. See, that everyday chaos over the bus stop isn't just pigeons being dumb. It's the visible surface of a constant aerial war, where every lazy circle and sudden freakout is shaped by the possibility that, at any second, a peregrine could drop on them like a meteor. But if pigeons are this wired just to not die, what kind of upgrades does the actual meteor need to catch them? Well, pigeons are just the opening act. If you zoom out from the city and follow that same invisible pressure wave of fear, it doesn't stop at the suburbs. It keeps going, all the way to the edge of the continents, where the land dissolves into mud, tide, and sky. Let's imagine you're standing on a cold, windy coast at low tide. In front of you, thousands of tiny shorebirds are calmly stabbing their beaks into the exposed mudflats, ticking along like little wind-up toys. It looks peaceful, almost boring. You might think nothing could possibly sneak up on this many eyes. But what you actually find is that the real danger doesn't come from the mud. It comes from a speck. One dark dot appears way up in the blue, so small you'd miss it if you blinked. The birds don't miss it. In an instant, the whole flat explodes. Sandpipers and plovers blast into the air, welding themselves into a single, dense, swirling cloud. The flock folds, ripples, and packs tighter because every extra neighbor between you and that shape is one more potential bodyguard, one more life that might get hit instead of yours. This isn't random panic. This is the world of peregrines using a global schedule. They time their own migrations to intersect with these mass shorebird pit stops, Arctic breeding grounds, estuaries in Europe, the Americas, Asia, Africa, Australia, any place that briefly concentrates millions of exhausted, calorie-starved birds turns into a seasonal danger zone. To you, it's a bird-watching hotspot. To a peregrine, it's an all-you-can-eat buffet that refills twice a year. And it's not just the tiny guys. Out on the bays and lakes, ducks and other waterfowl are running the same mental software. A falcon silhouette appears overhead, and suddenly every bird on the surface has a decision to make. Do you dive straight into the realm of pike, seals, or crocodiles? Or do you stay up top, hugging the water so close your wingtips are basically plowing a trench, hoping the falcon can't get the right angle without risking a splashdown? Pick sky, you risk a 240-mile-an-hour punch. Pick water, you risk being something else's lunch. Great options. And yes, these guys are all real, and they are almost everywhere. Peregrines are on every continent except Antarctica, riding coastlines, river valleys, desert cliffs, and skyscrapers. Their physical range is huge, but their psychological footprint is even bigger, because they don't just remove birds from the sky, they rearrange the sky's schedule. So if one predator can quietly decide when and where millions of birds feed, rest, and migrate, how much of the sky's daily rhythm is actually written by fear? And how do you design a body fast enough to make that fear reasonable? So if fear is writing the sky's schedule, the peregrine is the pen. But you can't just scare everything out of the air with vibes. You need hardware. Let's imagine you could strip the feathers off a peregrine mid-dive and freeze time. What's under the hood of something falling faster than a race car? You might think it's just a normal bird body with extra confidence, but what you actually find is closer to a flying crash test dummy. Start with the chest. Running down the front is a giant keel bone, like the spine of an upside-down ship. On that keel, the flight muscles are so oversized for the bird's weight that proportionally, you're looking at something closer to a sprinter's thighs welded onto a gymnast. Those muscles don't just flap. They let the bird slam its wings tight to accelerate, then explode them back out and pull up without the skeleton snapping. See, a 240-mile-an-hour dive is only impressive if you can still be alive at the bottom. That keel links into a rib cage and shoulder girdle that are ridiculously overbuilt. The bones are light, but they're braced and interlocked, turning the whole chest into a shock-absorbing shield. When the falcon suddenly bends that dive into a curve or punches prey out of the air, those structures are taking forces that would fold a more delicate bird, like bad origami. Now look at the wings. If you're picturing huge eagle-style sails, wrong movie. Peregrines have relatively short, compact, sickle-shaped wings. They're trading lazy soaring for control surfaces. Long wings are great for gliding in big circles. Short, stiff wings are what you use when you're basically a feathered missile trying to make micro-adjustments at freeway plus speeds. Every tiny twist of those wings lets the bird steer through turbulence and track prey that's dodging for its life. Running down the back, The vertebrae are reinforced too. Well, they have to be, because when a peregrine pulls out of a stoop, its body can experience G-forces that start creeping into fighter jet territory. Those neck and back bones, plus the muscles wrapped around them, act like built-in roll bars, keeping the spinal cord safe while the head stays locked on target. And here's the weird part. For all that armor, the bird is actually pretty light. Peregrines are relatively low mass for their size, which sounds like a downgrade until you realize it means less inertia trying to rip joints apart during tight turns. At the same time, at 200+ miles an hour, even that modest mass carries huge kinetic energy. It's the difference between being hit by a tossed tennis ball and a thrown brick. But even with all this, the peregrine is still wrestling brutal physics every time it dives. Misjudge the angle, mistime the pull-up by a fraction of a second, and those same forces that make it terrifying could black it out, snap bones, or tear wings. So how do you aim a living projectile through that danger zone and still hit something the size of a pigeon? So, how do you aim a living projectile through that danger zone and still hit something the size of a pigeon? To answer that, you first have to talk about something pilots train years to survive and still sometimes fail. G-forces. Let's imagine you're in a fighter jet pulling a tight turn. As the jet whips around, you feel yourself crushed into the seat. That extra weight is G-force, the acceleration that shoves blood out of your head and into your legs. At around 4 to 6 Gs, an untrained human starts getting tunnel vision. Push it higher, and your brain just checks out. You black out while the plane keeps going. You might think birds get a free pass because they're light and built for the sky. But what you actually find is that peregrines are flying right on the edge of blackout territory all the time. When a falcon pulls out of a 200+ mile-per-hour stoop or snaps into a sudden turn to match a juking pigeon, the G-load can spike hard. We're talking forces that would make your vision collapse into a gray tube, yet the falcon stays locked on target like a feathery missile with attitude. So how are they not face-planting into cliffs every other dive? Part of the trick is plumbing. Peregrines run an insanely efficient cardiovascular system, with a heart that can beat over 600 times a minute in flight, and blood vessels tuned to handle high pressure without bursting. High baseline blood pressure means that even when acceleration tries to drag blood toward the tail, there's still enough pushing up into the brain to keep the lights on. Then there's the hardware around the neck. Those thick, compact neck muscles aren't just for looking dramatic in profile shots. They clamp the head in a stable position during the pullout, fighting the whiplash that would rattle the brain and scramble vision. Stabilizing the head also keeps the tiny arteries feeding the brain from getting kinked or stretched, so blood keeps flowing while the rest of the body is basically in a controlled car crash. And yes, these guys are all real overachievers. Their small size actually helps in this arms race with physics. Shorter distances mean blood doesn't have as far to travel, so it's harder for acceleration to just park it in the chest. Less mass also means the absolute forces on each bit of tissue are smaller, even when the G number is the same. A peregrine hitting 8 Gs is not the same experience as your full-sized primate body doing it. But this is the world of brutal selection. Every stoop is a tightrope walk where one miscalculation can knock the falcon out or snap something vital. The only birds still hunting are the ones whose bodies can ride that line and win. So if you're a pigeon looking up, you're not just seeing a predator. You're seeing the survivor of 1,000 dives that should have killed it. And the next trick up its sleeve is even worse. So the question is, how does something that fragile-looking keep winning those 1,000 deadly dives? It cheats. Not with gadgets, but with the sky itself. You might think the air up there is just empty blue nothing, but what you actually find is a moving, shifting machine that peregrines know how to drive. Let's imagine you're a pigeon on a seaside cliff. Wind is hammering the rock face, cold air slamming into stone and being forced upward in a smooth, invisible elevator. To you, that's just annoying turbulence. To a peregrine, that's free fuel. They slide into those rising currents along cliffs, skyscrapers, and ridgelines and just float upward, wings barely moving, heart rate low. While everyone else is flapping like crazy, the falcon is quietly stacking altitude, building the perfect starting point for a stoop without burning much energy at all. And they're picky about where they park that missile. Peregrines don't just sit randomly overhead, they often set up upwind of whatever flock they're watching. Why? Because when they finally roll over and drop, the wind is literally at their back, shoving them faster. That tailwind means more speed, less effort, and one nasty bonus: the sound of their dive gets carried away from the prey. By the time your ears pick up anything, the brick has already been thrown. Now add the landscape, valleys, canyons, even those nice straight city streets you walk down. They all act like giant funnels for both wind and birds. Flocks naturally follow these paths because flying against the channel is exhausting. Peregrines learn these routes the way you learn shortcuts to work. They know that pigeons will stack up along a river corridor, or that migrating shorebirds will squeeze through a particular coastal gap, and they position themselves where the traffic jams form. Pattern interrupt. You probably expect the threat to come from the dark shadow above, but sometimes the danger is pure, blinding light. Falcons have been watched circling so the sun is behind them before they dive. They're not just falling, they're weaponizing glare. The prey looks up and sees nothing but white sky. Then a sudden black shape erupts out of the brightness. Your eyes can't adjust fast enough, your brain can't track the movement, and the first clear image you get is the moment of impact. See, this isn't just a bird flying through open space. This is the world of three-dimensional ambush geometry. The wind is a conveyor belt, the cliffs are launch pads, the streets are guiding rails, and the sun itself is a flashbang. To a peregrine, the sky is not a backdrop. It's a folding, shifting trap they can wrap around you from miles away. And the scariest part is how their bodies are built to ride that trap all the way down. But here's the twist you probably feel in your spine if you're a pigeon. The trap can think back. The sky isn't full of helpless targets just waiting to be deleted at 240 miles an hour. Over the same millions of years that turned peregrines into feathered bullets, their prey have been quietly rewriting their own survival software. Let's imagine you're a shorebird in a migrating flock, cruising along a cold coastline. You might think your best move is to spread out, enjoy the view, and not bump wings with your neighbors. But what you actually find, if you watch real flocks under attack, is the opposite. They tighten. The whole group snaps into this dense, pulsing cloud where individual birds give up some freedom of movement to become part of a bigger, glitchy shape that's way harder to hit cleanly. See, a peregrine wants one clean line, one victim whose path it can predict and intersect like math. Tight flocking breaks the math. When the falcon commits to a dive, the flock ripples, folds, and twists. From the falcon's point of view, the target keeps getting eaten by the crowd and reappearing somewhere else. It's like trying to throw a brick at one fish inside a boiling bait ball. And they don't just clump together. They move weird. Prey birds have evolved these chaotic, last-second escape scripts, jagged zigzags, sudden altitude drops, and full-body snap turns that would rip your shoulder out if you tried them. Some species add flash maneuvers on top of that, where they flip or twist to suddenly expose bright white rumps, wing bars, or tail patches. To you, it looks like random panic. To them, it's a high-speed signal. Something's wrong. Brake now. Follow this direction. Well, once enough birds in the flock flash at the same time, the whole group can synchronize the escape in a fraction of a second, way faster than if each one had to individually spot the falcon and think it through. It's basically a living alarm system that also happens to blindside the predator with a strobe of contrast right as it's trying to lock on. And yes, these guys are all real. Pigeons, shorebirds, ducks. They've even tweaked their bodies for this arms race. Some city pigeons and coastal sandpipers carry slightly longer, narrower wings that can pump out brutal bursts of speed. Others are tuned for tighter turning radii, trading straight-line pace for the ability to whip around in a split second and make the falcon overshoot like a badly timed fighter jet. This is the world of incremental cheats. One species shaves a few milliseconds off its reaction time. Another gets a tiny bit faster. Another learns a better group pattern. Stack that for a few million years, and you end up with prey that can actually dodge a falling missile. So if the victims keep getting better at juking, flashing, and vanishing into flocks, how do peregrines still win often enough to terrify almost every bird that sees their shadow? So if the victims keep upgrading their dodge stats, why doesn't the falcon meta just collapse? Because the peregrine does something your brain really doesn't like. It turns panic into a targeting system. Let's imagine you're looking up at a dense flock of shorebirds. To you, it looks like one giant swirling creature, pulsing and twisting like it's got a single nervous system. You might think a falcon diving into that cloud would just get visually jump-scared into missing everything. But what you actually find is that the chaos is the point. See, to a peregrine, that one big thing is actually a field of individual lines. Every bird is its own moving equation: speed, angle, reaction delay. While the flock is trying to blur itself into a single confusing shape, the falcon is busy pulling it back apart in real time. It's not just watching where birds are, it's watching where the rules of flocking will force them to be. Because here's the nasty part. A peregrine often aims not at the bird's current position, but at the future position that bird will be shoved into by the flock's collective motion a fraction of a second later. The flock turns, the wave ripples, and the falcon is already diving into the gap that doesn't exist yet. It's basically treating the entire group like one big predictive physics engine. And inside that engine, it's hunting for bugs. Those slightly slower, offbeat, or out-of-sync individuals? The ones whose wing beats lag just half a beat behind the rest, or whose turn is a tiny bit wider because they're tired, young, or just not that bright. That's who the peregrine quietly tags as you, while everything else is still screaming we. High-speed footage makes this feel almost unfair. As the falcon stoops, you see it making micro-corrections in the last few milliseconds, tiny tail flicks and wing twitches that look like nothing but actually move its impact point by whole bird lengths. One target jukes at the last instant, and, in the time it would take you to blink, the peregrine has already abandoned it and snapped onto a different bird that just exposed its belly for a frame or two. And yes, these guys are all real. This isn't CGI, it's just evolution deciding to install an auto-aim patch. The flock's best defense, merging into a single confusing superorganism, gets flipped into a giant glowing arrow that says, "Hit here." So, what kind of nervous system do you need to run live ballistic calculations in a storm of wings at highway speeds? Well, this level of precision isn't just about muscle and feathers. It's about the brain that's quietly doing the math while the sky is screaming. So, what kind of brain can do that kind of math while falling faster than a race car? You might think a peregrine is just a feathered missile with instincts wired in from birth. But what you actually find is a surprisingly big brain, crammed into a very streamlined skull, doing real-time calculations that would make your laptop wheeze. For their size, peregrines have a relatively large brain, and it's not just random gray mush. The areas that handle vision and motor control are beefed up, because this is the world of see it, rotate, strike, on a millisecond clock. Their deep fovea gives them insanely sharp sight, but that's only step one. The brain behind it has to turn a tiny moving speck into a full 3D prediction, where that bird will be by the time a 240-mile-per-hour falcon arrives. Let's imagine you're that falcon, mid-stoop. In a single instant, you're tracking the prey's zigzags, feeling the wind shear on your feathers, sensing how your own body is twisting, and reading tiny shifts in air pressure. Every feather on your tail is basically a sensor, feeding into a control center that has to decide, commit, adjust, or abort. You don't get minutes to debate it. You get a few frames of high-speed footage, and then the window is gone. And yes, these guys are all real decisions. Peregrines don't just lock on and blindly plow through. They constantly update the plan, nudging a wing here, flicking a tail there, dropping a few more meters to gain speed, or suddenly flaring out and climbing away when the angle goes bad. From the outside, it looks effortless. Inside, it's controlled chaos. Of course, they're not born perfect. Young peregrines are kind of like teenagers in stolen sports cars. They have the engine, but not the timing. Early hunts are full of overshoots, awkward angles, and spectacular misses. They misjudge distance, dive too steep, or try to hit prey that's already turning away. But every failure is data. Over weeks and months, they refine their timing, learn exactly how much lead a pigeon needs, and which dive angles actually pay off. See, that's where it gets creepy. Individual falcons don't just hunt. They develop favorite ambush routes around a cliff or a city, memorizing wind corridors and traffic patterns like they're building a mental map of the sky. One bird might specialize in high vertical drops from a skyscraper. Another becomes a low-level surprise artist, skimming along a river before popping up under a flock. That's flexible problem-solving, not just a hardwired script. So from a prey perspective, you're not dealing with a dumb projectile. You're dealing with a thinking, adapting hunter that remembers what worked on your flock last week and is already tweaking the next attack. Which raises a scary question. If the predator keeps learning, how does anything else in the sky keep up? So if the predator keeps learning, how does anything else in the sky keep up? It doesn't just panic harder. It starts to quietly remodel its own body. Let's imagine you zoom out, not for a week of hunts, but for 10,000 years of them. Every time a peregrine drops like a thrown brick, some bodies lose that lottery more often than others. A little slower, a little bulkier, a little too obvious against the sky, and those bloodlines just stop. What's left breeding are the ones that, by sheer luck at first, are built to dodge. You might think that just means fly faster, like every pigeon is trying to become a tiny jet. But what you actually find is weirder. Selection keeps nudging some species smaller, not bigger. A lighter body can jink harder at the last second, pull a tighter turn, bleed speed without stalling. Over generations, flocks in falcon-heavy airspace can end up a size class down from their country cousins, trading muscle mass for pure agility. Wings get dragged into this arms race too. Long, narrow wings are great for cruising efficiently, migrating in lazy arcs, saving energy. They're also great for dying in a 240-mile-per-hour ambush because they don't pivot fast. So you start seeing slightly shorter, rounder wings in populations that live under constant peregrine patrols. Less aerodynamic on paper, way better when you need to snap roll out of a stoop path in half a second. And the changes don't stop at shape. Time itself becomes a hiding place. See, peregrines don't hunt at full intensity every minute of the day or every part of a migration route. Birds that happen to feed a bit earlier or push their migration a little higher or more coastal might just miss the daily murder window. They live, they breed, and suddenly that weird schedule is the new normal for the whole population. Even color gets negotiated with fear. From a falcon's high vantage point, you're a moving contrast test against either sky or ground. So plumage patterns that blur that outline or match the local rock, sand, or water quietly win. Shorebirds in heavily hunted flyways skew toward mottled, low-contrast backs that vanish against mudflats when seen from above. City pigeons with darker, broken patterns can be harder to track in the visual chaos of concrete and shadow. And yes, these guys are all real. It's basically Fashion Week, but the judge is a ballistic hawk. This is the world of what biologists call an evolutionary arms race, where every successful dodge writes itself into bone, feather, and behavior. Well, now you have to ask a really unsettling question. If you could rewind the last few million years and delete peregrines from the script, how different would the sky look? Would your normal pigeon, duck, or sandpiper even exist in its current form? Or are you only seeing survivors sculpted by a shadow that keeps falling from above? So before we keep rewriting the entire bird family tree, pull the camera back for a second. Where are you in all of this? Let's imagine you're not a pigeon or a sandpiper. You're you. You're standing on a cliff edge or a city rooftop. Wind in your face, and you hear it before you see it. A ripping roar, like someone just tore a hole in the sky. Then a dark blur knifes past at over 200 miles an hour, close enough that your jacket actually flaps from the shockwave. Your brain says, jet. But what you actually find when you track it with your eyes is a feathered missile leveling out far below you. You might think, wait, shouldn't I be terrified right now? But to a peregrine, you're just background scenery. A weird, slow, ground-stuck mammal that smells like coffee and phone battery. They're not out here hunting primates. They're not even interested in your dog. As far as peregrines are concerned, mammals, reptiles, even most insects are just irrelevant clutter under the real battlefield. Because the terror field of a peregrine is incredibly specific. This is the world of things with wings. Their entire brain is tuned to one category: other birds moving against the sky. A pigeon? A duck? A shorebird that looks half a millimeter too relaxed? That's a target. A squirrel? A lizard? A beetle? Might as well be a rock. And that's where it gets weird. Every so often you get these stories of peregrines absolutely body-slamming the wrong thing. A racing drone doing laps around a tower, a model airplane, even some poor kids thrown baseball. To the falcon, it's the same basic silhouette. Small, fast object carving through its airspace at bird-like speeds. And yes, these guys are all real. The falcon folds, stoops, and only realizes it just punched a GoPro out of the sky when it tastes plastic instead of feathers. See, that's how specialized this niche is. Peregrines aren't general predators that happen to fly. They're apex hunters. In a layer of the world, most animals never really touch. Not the forest floor, not the canopy, but that thin sheet of cold, turbulent air a few hundred meters up, where speed and angle decide everything. It's like evolution built a giant, living sniper rifle and then bolted it to the sky. So from your rooftop, you're basically at the edge of someone else's war zone. You can watch, film, upload, feel your stomach drop when that blur hits a pigeon like a thrown brick, but you're not invited to play. Which raises a sharper question. If their fear effect is so laser-focused on birds, how far does that shadow actually stretch across the bird world? Is every species looking up in panic when that silhouette appears, or are there a few outliers that just aren't afraid at all? You might think the answer is no. Peregrines show up. Everything else panics. Roll credits. But what you actually find is way messier, because some birds look at the sky's fastest murder dart and go, "Yeah, we're not doing that today." Let's imagine a peregrine cruising along a cliff face, not even hunting, just minding its own high-speed business card life. Out of nowhere, 3 or 4 crows materialize behind it, like a feathery hit squad. They're not faster, they're not stronger, but they are loud, coordinated, and extremely done with this falcon existing anywhere near their nest. This is the world of mobbing. Ravens, crows, jackdaws, even bigger raptors like buzzards and eagles will sometimes flip the script and harass a peregrine on purpose. They chase, scream, faint in close, then peel away before those talons can connect. One-on-one, they'd lose that fight instantly. But in a group, with angles and surprise and sheer annoyance on their side, suddenly the apex predator is the one getting escorted out of the airspace. See, these birds aren't trying to win some epic aerial duel. They're playing a totally different game. They rely on numbers, timing, and harassment, not speed. You get one bird diving from above, another cutting across the falcon's flight path, another yelling in its face from behind. It's less fighter jet and more coordinated street protest with wings. The goal isn't to injure the peregrine, it's to make staying in that patch of sky so miserable that it just leaves. And it's not just the big guys. During breeding season, even tiny songbirds suddenly develop main character energy. A peregrine lands on a ledge to preen, or soars lazily over a field, and these little birds will straight up dive bomb it. We're talking sparrows, swallows, martins, starlings, all taking turns zipping past its head, snapping their wings inches from its face. On paper, that's like a mouse running up and kicking a tiger. But when you've got chicks in a nest, the math changes. Personal safety drops way down the priority list, and driving away anything remotely falcon-shaped jumps to the top. And yes, these guys are all real. Birders watch this happen all the time. It looks ridiculous, but it works often enough that the behavior sticks. Well, mostly works, because notice the fine print here. Almost all of this bravery is aimed at peregrines that are perched, circling, or just commuting from one hunting spot to another. You do not see a choir of crows cheerfully lining up in front of a falcon that's in a 240-mile-per-hour stoop. Nobody wants to be the thing between the missile and its target. So if some birds can stand up to peregrines, does that mean the fear is exaggerated? Or does it actually prove how terrifying a falcon has to be before the sky will risk fighting back at all? And what happens when even that stops working? So if the sky only fights back when it absolutely has to, how long has it been living like this? Is this just a modern pigeon problem? Or are we looking at something way older baked into bird DNA? Let's imagine you rewind the planet. Cities vanish. Skyscrapers melt back into rock. You might think that without concrete canyons and office towers, peregrines and their drama just disappear. But what you actually find, if you scroll back far enough, is that falcons as a whole go deep. We're talking millions of years of fossil history, with falcon bones showing up long before anything that looks like a modern pigeon, crow, or sandpiper. And some of those ancient falcons, peregrine-ish, not identical, but clearly playing the same role. Long wings, cliff-nesting bodies, built for high-speed hits in open air. No skyscrapers needed, because the original city for a falcon was an ancient sea cliff, a canyon wall, or a lonely volcanic stack above a giant open plain. You still get height. You still get open sky. You still get terrified flocks underneath. See, if you're a shorebird 2 million years ago, your life already sucks in a very familiar way. Endless exposed mudflats, nowhere to hide, and these dark arrow-shaped silhouettes dropping out of the cold blue. If you're a pigeon-like bird flapping over prehistoric grasslands, same story. The exact species change, but the basic script stays the same. Fast falcon above, panicked cloud of prey below. The funny part is, paleontologists argue over the exact branches of the falcon family tree, but the timeline still laughs at us. Modern humans are maybe 300,000 years old. The fast falcon versus flocking prey dynamic was probably already ancient by then. For most of human history, you're just arriving late to a horror movie that's been running for seasons. And over those timescales, tiny advantages stop being tiny. A shorebird that twitches half a second faster when a speck appears overhead. A duck that banks just a little steeper when a shadow moves wrong. One lives, one doesn't. Multiply that by millions of hunts, across thousands of generations, and you're not just training individuals. You're sculpting nervous systems, vision, even wing shapes. This is the world of evolutionary compound interest. Every successful dodge, every failed escape, quietly nudges genes and behavior. Parents that freak out at falcon silhouettes raise chicks that freak out at falcon silhouettes. Culture stacks on top of genetics, and yes, these guys are all real, both the predators and the panic they cause. So, when a modern sandpiper on some busy tourist beach suddenly detonates into flight at a tiny dot high in the sky, it's not just overreacting to one bird. It's channeling 1,000,000 years of bad encounters its ancestors had with fast, diving killers. The question now is, what happens when that ancient fear meets the fastest version of this predator that evolution has ever built? Let's imagine you follow that panicked sandpiper north, all the way to the top of the world. Suddenly, you're in the Arctic summer, where the sun basically forgets how to set and just smears daylight across the sky for weeks. For birds, it's like someone turned the work lights on and yelled, "You've got 40 days to live your entire life. Go." Down on the tundra, you've got huge flocks of shorebirds jammed into this tiny seasonal window. They arrive skinny from migration, then immediately have to feed, claim territory, build nests, lay eggs, and raise chicks before the cold slams back in. You might think endless daylight would make life easy, but what you actually find is a frantic, crowded rush, like a Black Friday sale with wings. And watching all of this? Peregrine falcons. They also migrate north, timing their arrival to the same explosion of food. While the sandpipers are staking out muddy flats, the falcons are locking down the high ground, nesting on cliffs that overlook the best feeding spots like they just reserved VIP balcony seats to an all-you-can-eat buffet. This is the world of high-latitude falcons, and the rules of the game change the moment they show up. In areas without nesting peregrines, shorebirds spread out, feed in long, relaxed stretches, and their flocks are kind of loose and messy. But put a peregrine eyrie on a nearby cliff, and suddenly the whole vibe flips. Flocks bunch tighter, like someone hit the compress button on the landscape. See, when a falcon could drop out of the sky at 200 miles an hour, you don't stand alone in the open for long. Shorebirds start feeding in short, intense bursts, then pausing to scan the sky. They shift from the wide, flat mud they'd actually prefer to spots with more cover, or at least better escape routes. Channels, hummocks, even patches of taller plants that give them a split second to vanish when a dark bullet appears overhead. Researchers who literally sat there counting birds, frame by frame, found real numbers behind the panic. In zones under peregrine airspace, flock density goes up, vigilance rates spike, and birds spend more time looking around than stuffing their faces. And yes, these guys are all real. The chicks, too. In areas without nesting peregrines, more chicks survive to fledging. Add a falcon pair, and chick survival drops, not just because some get eaten, but because stressed parents have less time and energy to feed and defend them. So one predator doesn't just decide who lives and dies. It rewires the daily schedule, redraws the map of safe places, and even changes how the Arctic summer feels if you've got feathers. The tundra might look wide open and calm to you, but for shorebirds under a peregrine's cliff, it's a bright, sleepless war zone. And this is just one breeding ground. What happens when you scale that kind of pressure across entire flyways? So if one tundra cliff can turn an entire breeding season into a panic attack, what happens when that same predator stops being local and just goes everywhere? Let's imagine you're a bird, and you've carefully memorized the danger zones on your map. Cliffs here, maybe a canyon there. Easy. Just avoid those, right? You might think peregrines are tied to dramatic mountain walls and wild sea cliffs, like some medieval gargoyle that only haunts postcard landscapes. But what you actually find is that they've treated the whole planet like a real estate portfolio. Sea cliffs, mountain ledges, city skyscrapers, highway bridges, quarries carved out by humans, even offshore oil platforms that are basically metal cliffs parked in the ocean. And yes, these guys are all real. See, every one of those structures plugs them straight into a different prey community. Nest on a coastal headland, and your menu is kittiwakes, murres, and other seabirds commuting over cold surf. Move inland to a river gorge or quarry, and suddenly it's sandpipers, swallows, and inland ducks blasting past. Shift to a city skyscraper, and now you're farming an endless stream of pigeons, starlings, and parakeets that evolution never designed for 240-mile-per-hour ambushes between glass canyons. Well, once you're that flexible, the map basically stops having blank spots. Peregrines are recorded over deserts, riding thermals above bare rock where any passing dove is a huge event. They hunt along tropical coasts, over temperate cities, and across Arctic tundra that spends half the year looking like a frozen parking lot. From equator to subpolar, they've quietly become one of the most widespread raptors on Earth, which is great for them because it means food everywhere, but really bad news if you have feathers. Each habitat comes with new hunting angles and weird environmental tricks, and peregrines pick them up like cheat codes. In cities, they use mirrored windows and sharp corners to mask their approach, turning office towers into vertical blinds for stealth attacks. On bridges, they learn the exact traffic patterns, timing dives between trucks like a feathered speedrunner. On oil rigs, they sit way above the sea lanes, dropping into migrating seabird flocks that thought middle of the ocean sounded safe. This is the world of sky pressure that doesn't stay in one place. If you're a shorebird leaving a tundra nest, you cross coastal cliffs patrolled by one set of peregrines, city skylines owned by another, and wintering wetlands where yet another pair is waiting over the duck flocks. So if you're a bird that migrates across continents, how many different peregrine territories do you actually pass through in a single year? And how many times does your heart rate spike long before you ever spot that dark bullet overhead? So, if a migrant sandpiper's heart is spiking 10 times a year, what about a bird that humans literally throw straight through peregrine territory on purpose? Let's imagine you're not a wild shorebird at all. You're a racing pigeon. This is the world of people who turn homing pigeons into feathered athletes. You might think it's just some quaint, old-timey hobby where you open a basket and hope your bird eventually meanders home, but what you actually find is a high-stakes sport. Owners drive birds hundreds of kilometers away, release them in big groups, then sit at home refreshing timers, praying their pigeon is faster than everyone else's pigeon. From the pigeon's point of view, it's a straight-line sprint through open sky. From a peregrine's point of view, it's a scheduled delivery of premium snacks, concentrated, predictable streams of fat, well-fed, slightly overconfident birds, all flying at roughly the same height right across established hunting routes. And yes, these guys are all real athletes, but to a falcon, they're basically a moving buffet sign. Race reports are full of moments where everything is fine, until it isn't. A flock is cruising in tight formation, then suddenly explodes in every direction like someone dropped a firecracker in the middle. Birds vanish mid-course with no trace. Others straggle home hours late, missing tail feathers with talon scars carved down their backs, or with one wing chewed up where a peregrine misjudged the angle and only half connected. See, peregrines don't care about your entry fees, your bloodlines, or your carefully planned training schedule. They care that, every weekend in season, humans obligingly mark out sky highways full of pigeons that all need to fly through the same valleys, the same river corridors, the same city skylines. Over time, fanciers start to notice patterns. Certain routes are graveyards. Certain release points are fine on cloudy days, but deadly when the air is clear and cold and the local falcons are on patrol. So now you have race organizers quietly doing something very weird, negotiating, in a way, with a wild predator. They study falcon nesting records. They know which coastal cliffs have a resident pair, which urban bridges host a hunting male, which ridgelines are basically no-fly zones unless you want your results sheet to look like a crime report. Routes get shifted a few kilometers this way or that, not because of weather, but because of one pair of sharp eyes and a 240-mile-per-hour dive. It's a pattern interrupt for how we usually think about wildlife. This fear isn't just some abstract ecology chart about predator-prey dynamics. It's paperwork, GPS maps, and anxious humans staring at empty sky, wondering if a dark bullet overhead just turned their champion bird into a puff of drifting feathers. And if human sports have to bend around that shadow, what does that say about the wild flocks that can't redraw their routes at all? So after all that, you might think peregrines are basically sky tyrants with zero brakes. If they're this fast, this widespread, and this terrifying, why doesn't the whole sky just run out of birds? Let's imagine a world where every cliff, every smokestack, every skyscraper has its own peregrine with anger issues. You'd expect a giant feathery famine, right? But what you actually find is way messier and way smarter, because evolution quietly installed some limits on the falcon side too. First big limiter: peregrines are not rabbits with wings. They lay just a few eggs a year, and a lot of those chicks don't make it. Adults are also insanely territorial. A breeding pair will basically draw a giant invisible circle in the air and tell every other peregrine, "Touch this," and we're both going into a 200-mile-an-hour fistfight. That territorial grid means you can't just pack 100 falcons over one pigeon plaza. Their own aggression caps their local population. Now flip it. Most of their prey breed like they've read the apocalypse memo. Pigeons, shorebirds, ducks, little songbirds. They can crank out multiple clutches a year, with way more young than any falcon pair could ever eat. And peregrines are usually picking off the slower, the distracted, the injured, the too young, the too old. It's brutal, but it's also a kind of quality control. The birds that survive are the ones with slightly better reflexes, slightly better wings, slightly better paranoia. See, that paranoia is not random. Prey actually learn. Flocks watch each other die. They memorize silhouettes, angles, and even specific perches where peregrines like to launch from. Young birds follow older ones and copy their panic responses. You're looking at cultural fear. The longer peregrines hunt a community, the more that community upgrades its early warning system. Over years, this turns into a slow-motion arms race. Peregrines refine their stoops, their timing, their ambush routes. Prey refine their scanning patterns, flock shapes, and escape spirals. The result isn't a clean win for either side. It's this twitchy equilibrium where everybody's stressed, but almost nobody gets totally erased. And yes, these guys are all real. Cities with resident peregrines, and still ridiculous numbers of pigeons. Coastal cliffs where falcons have nested for decades, while sandpiper clouds keep regrouping every season. The fear is huge. The kill shots are dramatic. But the math keeps pulling the system back from total collapse. Well, almost. Because when a predator is literally a guided missile with feathers, the usual rules of the arms race get pushed to the edge. So how does a bird that can hit you like a thrown brick at over 200 miles an hour actually pull off that attack? Without just shredding itself in the process? Without just shredding itself in the process? Let's imagine you pause that dive mid-air and suddenly switch perspectives. Because while every pigeon on the block is screaming internally, a whole different species is watching that same bird and going, "Wow, our guy is back." See, to a lot of humans, the peregrine isn't a monster. It's a miracle. This is one of the most famous comeback stories in modern conservation. In the 1960s, DDT was quietly wrecking their eggs, thinning the shells so badly that parents literally crushed their own chicks just by trying to keep them warm. Populations crashed. In some regions, peregrines basically vanished. You might think that's where the story ends. Apex predator poisons, disappears, roll credits. But what you actually find is thousands of people deciding, nope, not on our watch. Biologists started captive breeding programs. Falconers donated birds and expertise. Laws banned the worst pesticides. And yes, these guys are all real. Government wildlife officers rappelling down cliffs to swap fragile eggs for fake ones, then hand-raising the real chicks in incubators like tiny screaming fighter jets. Fast cut to today, and the entire vibe has flipped. Instead of just nesting on remote cliffs, peregrines have moved into cities like they own the place. Skyscrapers become substitute canyons. Office towers get nest boxes bolted to the ledges. There are 24/7 nest cameras streaming in HD, with tens of thousands of people watching a pair of birds sit on eggs. Classrooms tune in every morning. Kids vote on names for the chicks. Local news runs segments when the first fuzzy heads appear. Volunteers with binoculars and clipboards camp out on parking garages, tracking every flight like ground control for a tiny feathered space program. When a chick fledges successfully, people cheer. When one gets into trouble, there are rescue teams on standby. This is the world of conservation PR. The peregrine becomes living proof that environmental regulations actually work. You ban the right chemicals, protect nesting sites, put in the time, and a species at the edge of extinction comes roaring back and starts nesting on your stadium lights. It's a tidy, feel-good arc. Humans broke it. Humans fixed it. Roll the highlight reel, but zoom out, and that same highlight reel plays like a horror trailer for everything they hunt. For pigeons, shorebirds, and ducks, the peregrine's comeback isn't a heartwarming redemption arc. It's the return of a guided missile that can spot you from a kilometer away and hit you with the force of a heavyweight punch. The nest cam everyone adores. From a sandpiper's perspective, that's a sniper tower. So when we say the sky is terrified of peregrines, we're not saying they're bad. We're saying they're powerful, brutally effective, and wired into the lives of everything around them. Predators don't stop being terrifying just because we put them on posters. If anything, the better they are at their job, the scarier the sky feels. And now that you've seen the fan club side of this bird, it's time to drop back into the other perspective, how that conservation hero actually turns into a 200-mile-an-hour weapon. Let's imagine you're a sparrow in a city square at lunchtime. From your point of view, this isn't just a nice open space with crumbs. It's a giant, exposed killing field with terrible snack-based peer pressure. You might think the sky just looks blue, empty, safe enough. But what you actually find, once a peregrine has moved into the neighborhood, is that the whole sky feels tilted. Flocks pull in a little tighter, like someone cinched a belt around the group. Pigeons that used to wander into the open now feed closer to walls and under trees, ready to explode upward at the slightest wrong shadow. See, nobody has to see the falcon for it to be in charge. The possibility is enough. Starlings cut their time in the middle of a field from minutes to seconds. Shorebirds rest on sandbars closer to cover, even if the food is better farther out. Ducks spend more of the afternoon scanning overhead, burning energy just staring at that cold blue ceiling because any speck up there could suddenly turn into a 200-mile-an-hour problem. And when something moves across the sun? Total vibe shift. A random cloud shadow drifts over the marsh and, for a split second, every head snaps up. Half the flock tenses. Some birds launch, others freeze. Most of the time, it's nothing. But in a world where a dark bullet can drop out of nowhere and hit you like a thrown brick, you don't wait to fact-check. The soundscape bends too. In a wetland under a peregrine territory, you get these weird waves of noise. One moment, constant chatter. The next, a single sharp alarm call, then a rolling hush as hundreds of throats snap shut at once. Then, boom, synchronized takeoff. Wings erupt in layers, like someone slammed a shockwave through the reeds. In city centers, it's the same pattern, just with echo. Pigeons detonate off ledges, sparrows vanish into hedges, and the whole square goes from noisy to eerily quiet in 2 seconds flat. Well, that's what an apex predator does when it lives above you. It turns into an invisible pressure in the air, attacks on every decision. How long do you stay on that exposed branch? How far do you fly between safe spots? How much extra body fat do you carry in case you have to sprint for your life 6 times today? This is the world of constant background risk, where every bird is doing math it can't actually see. So, if you could suddenly borrow a sparrow's nervous system for a day, you wouldn't just look up and see a calm, open sky. You'd feel a map, safe corridors, sketchy gaps, and then the darkest zone of all, an invisible cone of terror hanging over the city, and if you traced its outline, it would have a falcon's shape. That invisible cone of terror isn't magic. It's built out of hardware, software, and a lot of very bad experiences. So, let's imagine you freeze that sky map and zoom in on the thing casting the shadow. Physically, the peregrine is just unfair. you're looking at a bird that can drop into a stoop at over 240 miles per hour, turning gravity and air into a weapon. Its skeleton is reinforced like a tiny carbon fiber frame, chest packed with flight muscle, neck braced so its head doesn't just snap off when it hits. The nostrils have those weird bony tubercles, like mini jet engine diffusers, so the air doesn't overpressurize its lungs. And then the eyes. Vision 2 to 3 times sharper than yours, deep fovea, locking onto a pigeon that, to you, would just be gray dot number 7 in the distance. You might think that's already overkill, but what you actually find is that the real terror lives in how other birds sense all this. Most songbirds and pigeons have a huge blind spot straight above their heads because their eyes are on the sides, the exact place a falcon likes to appear. So they've evolved this hair-trigger pattern recognition for that scythe-winged silhouette. One dark, pointed shape in the wrong part of the sky, and the whole flock detonates. And it's not just instinct. This is the world of socially transmitted panic. Young birds watch older birds freak out and learn, fast, which shapes mean keep eating, and which shapes mean drop everything and leave your soul behind. One gull screams, the rest don't stop to run the math. The alarm just ripples outward like a sound-based shockwave. Zoom out again, and you see the ecological fingerprints. Shorebirds pack into tighter, jittery flocks on beaches because a dense ball has fewer exposed edges. Ducks shift feeding to twilight when a falcon's vision edge gets a little worse. Some migrants reroute or change timing, flying higher, at night, or in bigger mixed-species groups. Over generations, wings get longer for sprinting takeoffs, bodies get lighter for sudden climbs, and behaviors get wired for constant look up and love checks. And yes, these guys are all real, even in places you don't think of as wild. Cities turned into vertical hunting arenas, pigeons blasting through alleyways like feathered traffic, peregrines using skyscrapers as fake cliffs. Racing pigeons accidentally signed up as professional sparring partners, with breeders quietly mapping falcon hotspots on race routes. The same conservation work that pulled peregrines back from DDT-driven collapse also rebuilt their fear shadow over downtowns, bridges, and stadium lights. So, no, the entire sky isn't literally terrified. But for the animals living in it, open air stops being empty freedom and becomes contested space. Every patch of blue has odds attached. Somewhere above that invisible ceiling, a compact, cold-eyed missile might be folding its wings. And next, we're going to follow one of those missiles from the moment it spots a target to the instant everything goes quiet. So, here's the weird part. Every smaller bird reads peregrine as pure horror in winged form. And you watch the exact same animal and go, that is so cool. Why are you rooting for the guided missile? You might think it's because you're detached, sitting in a warm room, not in a cold headwind over a canyon. But what you actually find is that we're obsessed with the very traits that make other birds panic: speed, precision, ruthless efficiency. A pigeon sees a dark bullet overhead and feels game over. You see a 240-mile-per-hour stoop and think, new phone wallpaper. Let's imagine you could swap bodies for a second. You're a duck. The sky is full of angles and escape routes and probabilities. That same falcon that you admire hits you with the force of a heavyweight punch. No narration. No slow motion, just feathers, and then nothing. From that side of the food chain, this isn't a nature documentary. It's a jump scare. But then we film it at 1,000 frames per second. We freeze the shock waves around the beak, the tiny bony cones in the nostrils acting like built-in jet engine diffusers, the wings flexing into this perfect swept-back triangle. And suddenly, terror turns into physics class. You're not prey anymore. You're an auditor, watching the universe show off what air and bone can actually do when evolution stops messing around and just optimizes. See? This is the world of apex predators that we keep coming back to. Sharks sliding out of the dark. Big cats ghosting through grass. Falcons carving the sky. In your daily life, the things that scare you are usually abstract. Emails, rent, climate graphs. Nothing you can point to with a clear outline and say, that's the thing. A peregrine is the opposite. It's a problem with feathers, and a very obvious solution. Don't be where it is. And yes, these guys are all real. That clean honed function is exactly what hooks you. The falcon doesn't look conflicted. It doesn't doom scroll. It just spots a target from a kilometer away with vision sharper than yours, calculates a dive, and commits. There's something almost comforting about that, even while it's objectively brutal. You might think understanding how much fear they cause would make them uglier, but it actually makes them bigger. Knowing that sandpipers change migration routes, that pigeons evolve tighter flocking just to survive these dives, turns the falcon from a cool slow-mo clip into a force that's literally sculpting other species' bodies and behavior. So, when you look at a peregrine on a skyscraper ledge, you're not just seeing a bird. You're seeing a pressure system that shapes cities, cliffs, and entire flyways. And next, when we ride along on that stoop you've been admiring from a safe distance, you're going to have to decide whose side you're really on. So, next time you walk outside, don't just check the weather. Check who owns the sky above you. Let's imagine you're downtown, surrounded by glass and concrete. You might think the only drama up there is a couple of bored pigeons doing slow laps around a skyscraper. But what you actually find, if you stare a little longer, is a different shape cutting through all that lazy flapping. Narrow, pointed wings. A long tail like an arrow. Moving way too fast to be just a bird. That's your falcon candidate. You don't even have to be in some wild cliff system. Cities, river bridges, coastal headlands, that random water tower by the highway. Peregrines love all of it because it's basically free high ground. So, the next time you hear a rush of wings or see a shadow rip across a wall, pause. Scan above the skyline for that fast, dark, swept-back silhouette. If it looks like a tiny fighter jet instead of a seagull, you're in the right ballpark. But here's the trick. Don't only look up. Look around. Other birds are way better at sky anxiety than you are. See that loose cloud of starlings suddenly snap into a tight ball? Those pigeons that were waddling around like they pay rent here, now exploding into a panicked spiral. That one gull that just started screaming like it saw a ghost? That's the web of fear turning on in real time. You might think a quiet plaza means nothing's happening. Watch what happens the moment a falcon launches. Pigeons slam into doorways. Starlings vanish under bridges. Ducks on a river all face the same direction at once, like someone yelled, "Incoming." You're not just watching birds, you're watching their early warning system. And yes, these guys are all real. You can even spy on them from your couch. Pull up a peregrine nest cam for your city or any big urban site. Let's imagine you keep it running in the background. Every time the adult suddenly rockets off the ledge, glance at the wider view. How many seconds before the pigeons on the neighboring roof blow apart like confetti? How often do the starlings stop chirping and just freeze? If you want to go full nerd, keep a tiny journal or just a mental log. Morning commute. Sky feels calm. Birds scattered. Nobody yelling. Lunch break. Flock compresses. Alarm calls. One fast shadow overhead. Evening, everything hugging buildings like the air itself got dangerous. Over a week, you'll start to feel when something is watching from above before you even spot it. See? This is the world of falcons you've been walking through your whole life without noticing. You're not just learning a new bird ID. You're tuning into an extra layer of reality. The invisible pressure system of fear and response that connects every wing beat. And once you can read that, then you're finally ready to ride along inside the storm itself and break down how a 240-mile-an-hour stoop actually works. So now that you can ride along inside that stoop in your head, let's imagine you zoom back out and look at the whole sky. Because this isn't just a cool physics demo, it's a story that almost ended. Within your parents' or grandparents' lifetimes, peregrines were actually vanishing. DDT was thinning their eggshells so badly that whole cliff faces went quiet. You might think a bird this fast, this perfectly built for killing, would be untouchable. But what you actually find is that one invisible chemical almost erased the fastest animal on Earth. And yes, these guys are all real, sitting on skyscrapers and bridges and coastal cliffs again, because people got loud. We banned pesticides. We raised chicks on the ground and hacked them out from city towers. We watched nests on grainy cameras and counted every fledgling like it was gold. The reason a feathered missile can still punch a pigeon out of the sky above your bus stop is partly because someone, somewhere, decided the world would be smaller and quieter without that shadow. So, what do you actually do with that? You're not going to personally wrestle a falcon away from a smokestack, but you can plug into the network that's already out there. Local raptor centers, rehab clinics, and falcon monitoring groups are always looking for people who can spot bands, log nest activity, or just say, "Hey, that bird looks sick." Citizen science projects track where peregrines hunt, what they're eating, and how their prey is changing. It's sky forensics. See, once you start noticing those sudden silences and panic explosions, you're already halfway to being useful. Did you see a flock of pigeons detonate into the air, then realize a dark shape was hanging way above them? Did shorebirds at a beach all turn the same direction before anything appeared? Those are real data points. Share those stories in the comments, with local bird groups, on apps that map sightings. You're watching fear move through the air in real time. And if your brain is now permanently stuck in, "What else is up there?" mode, good. This is the world of aerial arms races. You can dive into how swifts and swallows dodge predators, how duck flocks try to confuse attackers, or how hawks and eagles play a slower, heavier version of the same game. Or zoom in even more. Bird vision deep dives, airflow over wings, the physics of why a stoop doesn't just rip a falcon apart mid-dive. Because once you've seen the code running under the sky, it's really hard to unsee it. So the next time a shadow slides over a city square or a quiet marsh and every bird explodes into the air, you'll know that somewhere above, a feathered missile just reminded the sky who's in charge. And you're one of the few animals under that chaos who can actually understand why and decide what happens to it next.